Welcome to Lesson 21 in a C# from Start to Finish course. My name is Tim Corey, and today we're going to wire up the tournament dashboard form. This will be the form that starts when our application starts. It's a fairly easy form, so it shouldn't take us too long to get this running. Let's jump right in and get started. Here we have our form, and it's really only a couple things that it does. First, it loads the list of tournaments that we already have existing in our system. And if one of them meets the desire for what you want to open, you would select it and then click Load Tournament. Otherwise, if you want to create a tournament, you click this button down here. Now we haven't actually wired up the Load Tournament button yet, or the form yet. So this button won't really do anything yet. But the Create Tournament, we already have that form already set up. So we can go ahead and connect to that form. And loading this list right here, we've got most of the code for that already, so we can definitely go ahead and do that as well. So let's start by wiring up this drop-down. So we can go in the code behind by hitting F7. This is the code behind for our form. Now in here, we want a list that supports this drop-down. This drop-down is for tournament models. It's called Load Existing Tournament Dropdown. So let's create a list of tournament model. Do a control dot, and I either spelled it wrong or we have something else wrong. So yes, I butchered it. Wow, if I can spell today, that'd be great. Using tracker library.models. All right, so that works now. IntelliSense is wonderful. It saves me from a whole lot of spelling errors. So let's call this tournaments equals, and let's not do a new list yet. Let's actually say global config, control dot, to add the using statement here too. Dot, and we need to do connection, but it's not finding that yet. So let's find out why. And the reason why is I don't have an equal. Equals global config dot connection dot, and there's get team underscore all and get person underscore all. What we want is going to be the get tournament underscore all. And that doesn't exist yet. So let's create that. So in our iData connector or connection, we're going to create a list of tournament model called get tournament underscore all. So let's implement that. Let's go to SQL connection or connector first. And we'll do control dot, and we'll implement that interface. Now, if we scroll down here, we should find something similar like this right here. I'm going to copy this pattern. And then down here, I'm going to paste that pattern. So this is going to be a list of tournament model, not person model. And so everything else looks correct except for the fact that we have to get a stored procedure to look up that tournament information. So what we need to do is we need to change this over to be our tournaments. Right down here we have a sp tournaments underscore get all. And what that does, it just grabs the tournaments table and grabs all the active ones. And in this case, we have just one tournament here. So we're going to take this name right here. We'll copy this. We'll come back here and replace this. So now note that back over here in our database, It's the tournament name, the entry fee, and whether or not it's active, and the ID. And that's it. That's all there is to the tournament record. But we're filling in a tournament model which has so much more stuff in it. If we look at the model itself, we see we have the ID, the tournament name, the entry fee, which we haven't covered yet. That's not really a part of this tournament, it seems like. Let's go back and check. Oh, yep, there's the entry fee. Okay. The entry fee. So we have the ID, the tournament name, the entry fee. We don't care about active. We're leaving that alone. We may change that ID later or add that field later if we decide we need it. But we have the entered teams, we have the prizes, and we have the matchup rounds. And all of these will be null or empty to begin with. They won't be null, they'll be empty. So we need to populate those as well. So this is just step one. So once we have our list, then we need to populate prizes, populate the teams, and populate rounds. So how are we going to actually do this job? Well, it's actually not that hard. And I'll put it right above these comments. I'm going to do a for each. We're going to say tournament model T in output. So for every tournament in the output, which is our list of tournaments, we're going to do this code. And here's why. On each one of these tournaments, we have to load these things individually. And we'll need to pass in the ID. For example, up here in our get team underscore all, we load all the teams, but then for each team, we loop through using the team ID, we got the team members by team ID and load that in the team members list. We're going to do something very similar where we're going to loop through the prizes. We're going to say here's the prizes for each tournament by tournament ID, and then the teams. And we'll need to actually, for the teams, go 2 layers deep and get the team members by the team ID. And then from there, we'll also get the rounds and have to go through and get all the different levels there. So it'll be a little bit bigger, but nothing really terribly scary. It's stuff we've done a number of times already in different formats. So let's start with the prizes. Let's go to our database. And we're going to say SP prizes get by tournament. Let's modify this and look at it. It's a little slow. There we go. Okay, so we pass in the tournament ID, and it gives us all the prizes based upon the tournament ID. And it's going to give us back essentially a list that looks like this. So we just need to call this. That's really all there is to it for prizes. So we're going to say t.prizes equals connection.query. This is a prize model query. dbo.spprizes underscore get by tournament ID. And at the end of this, say .to list. And now our prizes will be populated for each tournament model inside of our list. Next, we need to load the teams. So let's first take this comment. I'm going to cut it out. I'm going to paste there just so we have that identify what we're doing. Now for the prizes, for the teams, it's going to look similar to this, where first we load our teams to list, not all of them, but the ones associated with this tournament. And then we take that list and look for each team member based upon that team ID. So let's actually copy that. We'll paste it down below and just change the values as necessary. So t dot teams, it's not teams, it's entered teams, equals connection.query team model, but it's not sp team underscore get all. If we go back over to our SQL, we'll see we have a sp team underscore get by tournament. And this, you pass in the tournament ID, and what will come back is a list of teams for that tournament. So we'll change that. And now we'll do a for each, not on output, but on t.entered teams. And so now for each team in the entered teams list, we'll find all the team members using the same query because that works. That's looking up by team ID, which we have. And so therefore I'd say for each team, the members should be this return value, these people. So that should take care of populating the teams. Again, just using or reusing the same code we had and just tweaking it a bit. We had to use a different store procedure to get just the teams for this tournament versus all the teams. But that's the only difference between get team underscore all and this one where it got just by the tournament. So that leaves us with the more complicated one, which is the rounds. Let's just paste this in up here, and we'll get rid of it down below. And so this is where we have to populate those rounds. Let's look at our database first and see what we have. We have SP matchups get by tournament and SP matchup entries get by matchup. So that's what we're going to need to look up and use. So let's modify the matchup first. And what this does is it grabs the matchup information based upon the tournament ID. And so if we were to pass a tournament ID in of 1 and run this, we would get back these values. So that's good. So let's just, we won't actually save that change I made to the query. So let's grab the SP matchups get by tournament. And let's look before we do at our matchup model. We have 4 values: ID, the entries, which we'll have to populate later, the winner, which is a team ID, well, it's going to be a team model, which we don't have a team model for that. We'll have to figure that out, and the matchup round. So if we were to do this again, the winner is either going to be in the SQL, it's either going to be null or it's going to be an ID. Now, there's a couple things to note here. First of all, the winner is coming back as a winner ID, but yet in our code, we just have winner, but that's a whole object. So that's getting a problem we have to resolve, is we can't populate an object from SQL, a nested object. We have to populate it afterwards. Like with this list of matchup entry model, we'll populate that after we've loaded this object. And so we can't put it there, and it's not even called the same thing. It's called winner versus winner ID. And we have this extra column here called team name, which that's joined on the winner ID. And so if we have a winner in the winner ID column, we'll have the team name as well, which is, it's a nice thing for us to have, but it's not necessary for us for this lookup. So I'm thinking we might actually just get rid of that. Let's take that out and take out then, of course, this t.teamName. And let's run this again and just see, yep, it still gives us the same information. It's just that now it gives us no extra information. So let's do the alter on that, which is already set up for alter procedure. So we'll run that. So now I made a slight modification to our store procedure. Nothing too big, but we do know that it's returning a winner ID. And so we need to handle that over in our code. The best way I can think of right now to handle this is actually to add a new property. The only time we'll use this property is when we're bringing it in from SQL. So the winner ID is going to be the ID from the database that will be used to look up the winner or to identify. How about that? Okay, so we're going to pass in this winner ID, but winner won't be populated. But we need winner to be populated for everything else, and so we'll go ahead and get that populated once we've loaded up the data. So let's start by just having a list of matchup model called matchups. And that's all it's going to be. We'll say equals connection.query matchup model. And DBO dots. Let's go back to our store procedure and grab that name. And there we go, paste it in. And we'll grab all the rest of the stuff as well. Just we keep that same format. And we're not passing in anything for a parameter. So we can actually take that parameter off. And now it should be good. Oops, we are passing in a parameter. Let's change that. We need to create this var p and pass in the tournament ID. And that is from t.id. So we pass the tournament ID, and let's verify that. We pass in the tournament ID right there. And that's what's used to look up our records and get only the matchups that are for our tournament. Now, once we have them, we need to populate a couple of things. First of all, we need to populate, we're going to do a for each here. And we'll say matchup model m in matchups. And just like up here with our team model, we're going to declare a new lookup. So we'll copy all of this and say, okay, the first thing to do is look up our matchup entries. So it doesn't go into a new variable, it goes into m.entries. And this will be a matchup entry model. We will not pass in our tournament ID, we'll pass in our matchup ID. And so that would be m.id. And how I know that? Well, back over here in SQL, we created this sp matchup entries underscore get by matchup. If I modify this, we're passing in the matchup entry. We call it entry instead of ID. Let's actually change that to ID to be consistent. I don't believe we use this anywhere else. The thing to be cautious about is if you've used a store procedure somewhere else, you just broke it everywhere else. So what I would do, since I know that only my code has been using this database, I can do a control F in here, paste in my store procedure name, say the entire solution, and it says I can't find any reference to that. So that's good because I don't need to change any signatures in. I don't need to change it from matchup entry to matchup ID. So in here we can now run this. So that's been updated. And then grab this name of the stored procedure and paste it in right there. Now we've populated our matchup entries. And just to verify what goes in there, we can actually run just part of this stored procedure and see we have a matchup ID, a parent matchup ID, team competing ID, and a score. What do we have in our matchup entries model? We have the team competing, the score, and the parent matchup, and the ID. So we need to pass in these IDs, parent matchup ID and team competing ID, and look both of those up by their respective IDs. So, same pattern here. Prop int team competing ID. And the parent matchup ID. All right, so now these two values we populated, these IDs, but not their actual models that they are representing. So we'll need to do that as well. So that's the three things we need to do now. Let's come back over to our SQL connector. Now that we've populated our entries, we're going to need to loop through each entry and populate the actual models for matchup model and team model. And we're also going to need to, outside of the loop for those entries, we'll need to populate our team model based upon the winner ID. So let's get started on that by doing a for each. And if you get a little bit lost, or if you think, oh, I'm going to forget that, don't try and keep it in your head. Write it on a piece of paper or put it in code comments. Okay, so we could put in code comments right up here something like, populate each entry 2 models and populate each matchup 1 model. Just so we have an idea of what we're doing. And those notes are all up to you, how you want to make them look. So for each matchup entry in entries, now we can say is we need to loop through and find each ID that we need to populate. We need to populate the team competing based upon a team competing ID. Let's start there. So I'm first going to do a check to see if me.team competing ID is greater than 0. Now it'll be 0 if we don't have a team competing ID. It's not going to be empty like we would have in a text file. We have to have a number here, so it defaults to 0 because there is no ID ever of 0 when we have our auto incrementing ID fields. We always start at 1. Therefore, ID is 0 means it's not really a valid ID. So, if matchup entry.team competing ID is greater than 0, then we need to find that team and populate it. Well, if we look up here, we have this method called getTeam_all. Not only does it get all the teams, it also populates all the members for us. In that case, what we can do is actually use this list to grab out, we can call this, and then find just the team we need. It doesn't make sense, though, to put that inside a for each loop and look it up twice. So let's look it up right here, where we'll say a list of team model, all teams equals get team underscore all. This will be all the teams now that are available to us. So we can say me.teamCompeting equals all teams dot where x equals greater than x dot id double equals, and we have the ID that we're looking up, which is me.teamCompetingID. First, and there we go. So what we've done here is we've said in all the teams, find the one that has the ID that matches the ID we're looking for. If you find it, grab the first record because it returns a list of teams. And we should only have one in that list, therefore grab the first one, put that in the team competing spot. We loop through both entries and we're done. So that's pretty simple. Now, let's do the same for matchup model. So we'll come down here and say if me.matchupModelID is greater than 0, we need to look up the matchup model. And this is where we get a little tricky. And sometimes tricky can be bad, but I think in this case it's okay. And so I want to talk it through with you first, though. So right now we are loading our entire tournament. And one of the steps in doing that is loading all the round information. And the first step we did was we loaded all the matchups. And then we looped through each matchup and said, okay, here's how to populate more information about that matchup. Now these matchups are in order. If we go back over here and look at this stored procedure, let's grab SP matchups get by tournament, I believe is the one. Yep. So if we look here, oops. Well, let's change this to a 1. Notice that the matchup round is in order. Now that's because it's just how it's put in the database, which we could rely on, but let's go even further. Let's change that back. But then we're going to say order by matchup round. And if you don't specify a direction, it will give a direction of ascending. Therefore, if we change this back to 1, run this again, nothing seems to have changed, which is good because that's what we want. But if we ever got out of order in our database, it's not a problem because we're going to be ordering by our matchup round. And we'll update that. So we can rely on the fact that the first matchup in our matchups list that we populate is going to be from round 1. And all round 1 matchups we loaded before we go to round 2. Well, this parent ID is for the previous round's information. That means that we should have in this list of matchup model the parent that we're referring to. Therefore, we could say me.parentMatchup equals matchups dot where x equals greater than x dot id equals double equals me.parentMatchup id. First and done. That should be able to find the parent based on the fact we've already loaded them in. Now it is a little circular And we've already seen what circular can do if we're not careful, if you don't think through all of the implications. But in this case, the only thing that would really happen is we do this lookup here. If it can't find it, it will blow up on this first. And if that happens, then we'll address it by some other means. But doing this saves us a whole bunch of work of loading every matchup and then doing essentially all of this work for every matchup and then looking up to find the parent ID. So hopefully we can keep this in place. Otherwise, we'll have to go back to the drawing board and figure out a more efficient and a better plan. But I think this should work. So we've gone through the entries. We had 2 models to populate, and that's done. So now back over to matchup model. And we have to get the team model for winner. Well, we're already looking up team information. So we can do that either right below or right above this for each. Let's do it right above. So we're going to say if m, not me, m, dot winner ID is greater than 0, m dot winner equals all teams dot where x equals greater than x dot ID double equals m dot winner ID dot first open close paren and semicolon. And now we've populated the matchups model as well. So in theory, we have now loaded all the round information. We have not yet populated the rounds, but we at least loaded it up into this matchups list. Next, we'll have to loop through and put together all of our different rounds. But first, I notice I have an error up here. It's kind of hard to see as you have a 1-character variable. But if you can see that, there's actually a little red squiggly underneath the P. And if I right-click on it, it should come up at some point. Oh, I just have the mouse over, I guess. A local or parameter named P cannot be declared in this scope because that name is used in enclosing local scope to define a local or parameter. Essentially what that's saying is you've declared P in here, but then down below in the parent scope, you've declared P again. Well, there's a really easy way to fix this. We can declare P at the using level and then just reload it every time we need it. And that solves that problem quite handily. All right, so that takes care of that error, which is good. Now our file's not yelling at us saying there's an error. But now we have to address the idea of populating these rounds. How are we going to do that? So in case you've lost track of where we're at, let's review. We are trying to get all of our tournaments. So we're looping through every tournament we've returned. And in this loop, the tournament model we're working on is labeled as T. So T.prizes, load that up. T.enter teams, load that up. And then cycle through and add the team members. And then the hard one, or at least the more complicated one, it's not hard, it's just more complicated, came with the rounds. And so now we have this matchups, which if we come down here to the bottom of this 4, notice I'm using my guides here. So I can say at the bottom of this 4, or for each, my matchups should be completely taken care of. And now I can loop through and put these into rounds. Now remember, my rounds are a list of matchup model. So how are we going to put this into the right place? Well, let's do a for each on our matchup model. Now we just did a for each, but this for each, we're working on the models. We're adding stuff. I don't want to get the two confused, so I'm going to separate them out. You could put the logic for this in the same for each, but I'm just going to keep it separate, and it makes it a little more understandable what's going on in each section. So for each matchup model M in matchups, same exact signature. So now I can loop through and create my lists. And actually right above here, I'm going to create a list of matchup model called current row. And I will initialize that. I'm also going to capture the int current round. I'm going to start that off in round 1, not round 0. So what's going to happen is I'm going to do a loop. I'm going to say, first of all, if m dot matchup round, which that's an int, if m dot matchup round is greater than current round, that means we've moved to the next round. Now we're doing this right away before we do anything else. And the reason for that is because if we've changed rounds, we have to do some housekeeping before we add that anywhere. So if the round is changed, what we're going to do is say that t.rounds.add current row. So that's the list of matchup model. Now we haven't put anything in there yet. Don't worry, we'll get to that. But the very first thing we do is check to see if we've changed rounds. Because if the matchup round is 2, that means we've completed round 1, which means that this current row should have all of the round 1 information. Therefore, add that to our rounds. Then, current row equals new list of matchup model. And current round, the counter, plus equals 1. So move to the next round. So that's what happens if the round is changed. But what if the round's the same? Well, in that case, we're going to say current row dot add m. So let's just walk this through. We have, say, 3 matchups. The first 2 are for round 1. The second one is for round 2. This starts off at round 1. So it comes in and says the current matchup round. Well, that's round 1. Is that greater than round 1? No. Therefore, just add that first matchup to our current row. Go to the next matchup. Its matchup round is also round 1. Is that greater than round 1? No. Therefore, just go down here and add the second matchup to our current row. Go back up to the top. That matchup round is 2. Is that greater than the current round? Yes. Therefore, add the current row, which is those 2 matchups, add that to the rounds. So our list of matchup model, which contains 2 matchups, gets added to our rounds. Then we clear out the current row so we can add new matchups to it. And we change the current round to 2. Then we add the current matchup to our current row. We go to the top. We only had 3, therefore we're done. Therefore, at the end of this, we have to say current row dot, not current row. It would be t.rounds dot add current row. So we have to add that last row in. And that should populate our list of a list of matchup model. So we can save this. And there's all of our code for the get tournament underscore all. Now all that code's in one file. It really needs to be refactored so we can have some more useful functions that we could probably use some other places. But for right now, we'll leave it as it is. And we'll come back over to our form. And we're going to call that for SQL. And that should populate our tournaments. So in theory, we're done on the SQL side. Before we compile, though, we have to take care of the text connector as well. Otherwise, the data connection will yell at us because we've not yet implemented our interface. So I just implemented that interface. And now down here we have get tournaments underscore all. Now you may be saying, oh no, we have to do all that logic all over again, but different for text files. Yeah, it's going to be really hard. It'll probably look something like this. Copy. Paste. That's it. Why was it so easy? Well, because with our text files, we have to load the tournament model and hydrate it before we can then add one more tournament. Therefore, we have a code already for getting all the tournaments. Therefore, with that one copy paste, we have implemented fully the text file interface. Now, let's test to make sure this works. So again, if we've forgotten, let's close out everything else. We'll save all of that. And we're going to open up our dashboard so we can see it. We're populating this dropdown right here, the load existing tournament dropdown. How do we do that? Well, let's create a private void wire up. Let's call it wire up lists. And in here, we're going to say, I keep forgetting that name. This is called the load existing tournament dropdown. So we're going to say load existing tournament dropdown dot data source equals tournaments. And then we're going to say load existing tournament dropdown. Boy, that's a long name. Dot display member equals, and we have to pick one property from our tournament model. If we look, tournament name sounds pretty good. We don't have to create any kind of other property for it. That one's pretty descriptive. So now we just need to call this wire up lists. And as long as we do it after we initialize our list, which we are because we're in the constructor and this has already been run. So once we populate this and then run this, which just happens in the constructor, then we should have a dropdown that's filled with all our tournaments. Now let's run this to find out, but in order to do that, we have to go to program. We can keep it text file for now, but we shouldn't be using the create tournament form. We should be using the tournament dashboard form, the form we eventually want to be the startup form. So let's run this. And now if we move our file over, we have it might work and now question mark. Those are the two tournaments we have in our list. That works. Let's change this over to be the SQL connector. Run it again. And we get an error. And before we even read the error message, hopefully by looking at the code, you should be able to spot our issue. In fact, you may have been yelling at the screen. saying, Tim, you forgot something. Tim, you forgot something. Yeah, that's a pretty glaring one I forgot. So let's look at what the error says in case you haven't caught on yet. And no worries if you haven't. But it says procedure or function sp prizes underscore get by tournament expects the parameter at tournament ID, which was not supplied. And what do you mean I didn't supply it? Well, you didn't supply it. Okay, so down here we've passed in, tournament ID to our parameters and then pass that in there. We can do that up here. So let's populate that, and then let's make sure we add the other information here. I'm going to move my cursor up. And so now we've passed in the correct parameter. But before we get too cocky, we have the same issue right down here with our teams. So let's make sure we copy these lines and do the same thing for our team as well. Let's hit continue. And now we have our first tourney, which is our only tournament, which means that both SQL and text files are now working to populate this box. Perfect. All right. So we're not going to wire up this load tournament because we don't actually have the form wired up. You have to do anything. So we're not going to mess with that because we have to pass that tournament in. And so we'll just wait till the next video for that. But we can call the create tournament form. Now the question is going to be, where does the create tournament form go once it's created the tournament? And this is the one we agonized over because of all the logic behind it. And we're going to have to add a little more. I'm sorry. But don't worry, it's not a big deal. But what happens when we click this button after the tournament has been created? Do we come back to our form here and just have it add to the list? Or do we go right to the tournament viewer? I'm thinking the best option here is to go right to the tournament viewer, the same as if you clicked load tournament. That makes the most sense to me. So let's do that, which means that this button right here, the only thing it needs to do is open the create tournament form. And that is easy to do. We'll double click on our create tournament. We're going to say create tournament form. And we'll call this FRM equals new create tournament form, FRM.show. That's it. We create an instance of that class, and then we say .show, which actually launches the form. To show this works, let's start this up. We'll say create tournament, and that pops up this form right here. In fact, we could go through and save all the information just to make sure it all works. And let's add another prize as well. Just we have a couple prizes in here. I'll make this 25. So now we have 3 teams, 2 prizes, and we can say create tournament, which seems to do nothing. And that's okay because it will go to that other form when it's done. But if we were to start this back up, our dropdown should now have first tourney and second tourney. Now, why did I stop it and restart it? Well, when you create that tournament, it never loaded this back up. It never said, hey, we've loaded, we need a new tournament loaded. So we can also address that in a future video as an improvement to actually make sure we refresh this list whenever a tournament is created. But for today, this form is done. We've gotten all the work done it needs to do. We load the list, which is a little tricky for SQL, It was very, very easy for text files. And we wired up the Create Tournament button to actually launch the Create Tournament form. So that's it for today. In our next video, we're going to tackle the Tournament Viewer form and get that started. The Tournament Viewer form is our last form we have to do. And just to give you a quick preview, we're going to load all the rounds into our list here and say round 1, round 2, round 3. And based upon which round, we're going to display all the information about that round. And we're going to wire up this checkbox to make sure we say if you want to have only unplayed games listed in the list or not. When we select a matchup, it's going to allow us to see which 2 teams are playing, and then we can enter in a score and hit the score button, which will identify who the winner is, who the loser is, and mark that matchup as complete. So there's a couple things we have to do there, but that will allow us to walk through the entire tournament and complete all the matchups. So we're getting very close. This is the last form we have to tackle before we come back through and do a couple things like exception handling and logging and other cleanup like sending email out. And if you're one of the paid subscribers, you'll also get the video on how to send text messages, which would be fun. So, but that's for the next video. We'll cover the tournament viewer. So stick around for that.